The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Now that government has been reopened, the president can move on to the really important issues like pushing Bible literacy classes in public schools. It seems as though a Fox and Friends discussion of this topic triggered Donald Trump to tweet about it, saying numerous states introducing Bible literacy classes, giving students the option of studying the Bible, starting to make a turn back. Great. And I guess by that he means a turn back to putting one particular religion in public schools. North Dakota State Representative Aaron McWilliams, who obviously is a Republican, was on Fox and Friends, and he is co-sponsoring a measure in North Dakota to support these Bible literacy classes. Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, Virginia, and Florida have introduced similar proposals. And these would require or encourage public schools to offer elective classes on the Bible with a focus on its historical significance. So this is, they want to take an inch here, Pat, in order to later get a mile. That's what this is, right? They understand you can't force Bible literacy classes, particularly focused on religion, into public schools, at least not immediately. So we'll create elective Bible literacy classes that are more historical than religious in nature. Of course, they are only creating them for one religion, but this is them trying to first get an inch so that they can later try to take a mile.
And they wouldn't be able to get away with calling it Bible study because that would be ruled unconstitutional. So they're being a little bit clever here and calling it Bible literacy. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. I guess the Bible is kind of tough to interpret. So maybe with these literacy classes, you'll get some help there. This is entirely to not just teach about world religion and the history of world religion, but to push one specifically. And I think it's perfectly fine to learn about religions. I did that growing up in public schools, but there was always the emphasis made that we're not trying to push these on the students. We're just trying to teach them about what other people around the world believe. And it wasn't just Christianity we were learning about. It was Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and all these other religions too. And that has to be their approach.
Yeah, you have to. The right way to teach about religion in public school is to say, hey, religion is a thing that many people around the world subscribe to. Here is the history of religion as we know it. Here are the earliest religions. Here is religious belief now. Here are socio-political issues related to religion. You talk about separation of church and state and how certain governments are intertwined with religion, typically the predominant religion in the country, and certain governments have enshrined secularism into the law where you're at least supposed to have separation of church and state. Any of that, even including more sort of philosophical religious questions about, free will. And I'm okay with all of that stuff. But even offering electives on the contents of the sacred texts of just one religion, I'm completely against it. Although, interestingly, Pat, they may win this one. The way they are wordsmithing it may actually allow this to take place.
I think so, too. I think they definitely can win this. But on the bright side, putting God and the Bible back into our public schools, that will reduce the number of school shootings. At least that's what I've heard from many pastors and politicians over the years.
Yeah, that's one we've heard before, and maybe we'll get some. It's horrible to say because I hope there are no shootings, but if this happens, maybe we will get some statistically significant data about the effect of religion in schools, Bible study, although it's not that, it's Bible literacy. By the way, what an insane term, Bible literacy, truly. Maybe we'll get some data about that at some point in the future. Other than the Bible, one place where a lot of teens are spending time is the internet. And psychiatrists now say that internet addiction affects about 8% of Americans and growing, both in the U.S. and around the world. And one leading psychiatric researcher in this field, Kimberly Young, who's been researching internet addiction since several decades ago, at least at this point, says we're all mildly addicted and that's obvious in our behavior, but that in some particular cases, it is acute in a way that it sort of requires treatment when it becomes compulsive internet behavior beyond what might be just commonly being overly attached to social media and scrolling Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And this is now leading to a whole bunch of new mental health treatment programs around the world, around the country, in Florida, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and in other states that are doing inpatient internet addiction treatment. Two sides to this, Pat. One is it's so great that this is being taken seriously and that professionals are offering help to blah, 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 blah. The other side of it is great. It's another way for so-called rehab centers of different kinds to make money, often from people who can't even really afford it.
Well, people are always going to make money off of problems. That's just the world we live in. I don't think it's any reason to avoid treating people with this problem. And I think it's, generally stigmatized. It's easier now for people to accept that you'll have that it's possible to become addicted to a substance like drugs or alcohol. And, it's not that much more of a stretch to say that you can get addicted to gambling or sex, or now it's becoming video games and the internet. I think it's a totally legitimate addiction, and I think more and more organizations will start to recognize that soon.
I think you're right. And the other important thing that the literature, the mental health literature, seems to suggest right now is that much like with other diagnosable conditions, internet addiction can be both real but not the primary underlying condition. So like insomnia is a really good example. Insomnia as a primary diagnosis exists in the medical world, meaning you have insomnia. But very often it's insomnia due to anxiety or depression or worry about what's going on in your life, or anxiety about what's going on the next day or whatever. It can be related to sleep apnea. It can be a side effect from medication. So while primary insomnia exists, it's often a symptom or side effect of some other primary underlying condition. In the same way, what we are learning is that it does appear that internet addiction is totally in and of itself just kind of its own thing, but that it often seems to overlap sometimes with ADHD and or OCD. It can relate specifically to sex/porn addictions. It can be related to depression and anxiety. And interestingly and unfortunately, internet-heavy social media use seems to be both a cause of and an effect of depression and anxiety. So we're learning more about it. A lot of the elements of this seem pretty straightforward and obvious in terms of how they are related to things that are going on in people's lives. And of course, what the right treatment is seems to vary, much like with lots of other addictive type behavior. Is it cold turkey quitting? Is it establishing reasonable guidelines where you put an app on your phone that will only allow a certain number of minutes of use of particular apps during the day? Lots of approaches to this, but what's abundantly clear, Pat, is that this is not going away anytime soon.
I think the remedy is a Dave Rubin type off the grid month, like maybe an off the grid August. I would love to do something like that. I wonder how I would function in that kind of environment, because I do think I have some mild internet addiction. I'm on the internet all day at work, and then of course I have downtime activities that don't have anything to do with the internet, like working out or hanging out with friends. But then again, I'm also watching YouTube videos. I'm also watching Netflix. I sleep with my phone in bed, so like I definitely have some internet addiction, and that has to do in part with the fact that I grew up in the internet age. I wonder how I would do if I just unplugged for a month. I really do.
Yeah, phone in bed is a bad one. That's the real concern that I'm hearing. That one is, I've actually moved my phone. So I charge my phone overnight because that's just like the best time for me to charge my phone. And I used to have it plugged in like very, very close to my bed. And now I've actually moved it away. And I also use my phone as my alarm clock. And that also makes it so I can't just very easily turn it off without at least sort of sitting up and getting out of bed for a moment. So I found that that's a really good thing to do, and I would encourage you to do it.
We'll see. Maybe next year. When 2020 comes around and it's time to make New Year's resolutions, that'll be at the top of my list.
Yes, because what better time to make decisions than at the start of an arbitrary delineation of how time has passed? I love that. That's a really, really good idea. Seems to get the gym that I go to very, very filled up, that's for sure. Let's talk about Tom Brokaw. Tom Brokaw is now taking some heat because of some comments he made about Hispanic people. And he's pointed out that intermarriage and conflicting cultures are creating interracial hostility, that it would be much better if Hispanic people assimilated more, that it is just not happening to the degree that it should be, and that Hispanic people should be working harder, and that they should also not be codified in their communities, but make sure that all their kids are learning to speak English, that they're comfortable in their communities, and that, quote, both sides are going to need to do outreach in order to make this happen. There are very drastically varying reactions to what Tom Brokaw said, ranging from "this is the most racist thing I've ever heard said about Hispanic people, and Hispanic people aren't the problem, but it's the culture of the United States," and the sort of fundamentally discriminatory, racist, xenophobic apparatus that is keeping Hispanics down, all the way over to Tom Brokaw didn't say anything controversial and we shouldn't be criticizing him for it. NBC is saying that these are his comments and his comments alone, and these are not reflective of their perspective of any kind. And it is a view that has been espoused on Fox News for a very, very long time. Fox News has talked about Hispanics need to assimilate more. Brokaw has now talked about Hispanics need to assimilate more. And the thing about this, Pat, is that this is not a new idea, right? We've heard from all sorts of different enclaves in the past. We've heard from white nationalist Richard Spencer that even though Jews look white, they're not really assimilated into American culture. They kind of are this other thing. That black people, even born in the United States, really have their own culture. And this is why there is racism, because they are not fully assimilated. And we've obviously heard it endlessly about Hispanics as well. So it's not unique. It's not the craziest, most racist way to present this idea, but it seemed sort of out of touch and kind of like a get off my lawn moment for Tom Brokaw.
Yeah, when it comes to assimilation, I think it's up to the individual. If you want to stay in your community and preserve your own culture here in the United States, you can do that. That's offered to you as an option. If you want to branch out, assimilate, mix with other cultures, you can do that too. That's why I like that the term melting pot isn't necessarily considered politically correct anymore. We like to refer to the country as a fruit salad, because that way we're preserving all of our respective cultures. The one thing that I would agree with Brokaw on is that Hispanics, or any immigrant for that matter, should make an effort to learn English, but the data shows that Hispanics are actually doing quite well at that. 76% of Hispanics age 18 to 33 speak English very well, and 88% of Hispanics 5 to 17 speak English very well. That's important, I think, because it'll help you get a job and pursue your career, and you'll be able to just speak and communicate with people in the country, and that's all very important. Aside from that, though, it doesn't really matter that much to me if people choose to assimilate or not.
Yeah, the other element about this is that the framing of the lack. So one thing that is pointed to often in these conversations is look at the separation. Look at these, for example, as Brokaw was referring to, look at these insular Hispanic communities that aren't learning English and are just with themselves. When you look at studies that poll people about, if you're white, how many non-white friends do you have? If you're black, how many non-black friends do you have? If you're Hispanic, how many non-Hispanic friends do you have? Why is it merely the fault, to use a term, of the Hispanic people if they don't have too many non-Hispanic friends, rather than looking at the 75% or more white people who don't have any non-white friends and saying, well, hold on a second, maybe the white people are also in some sense being insular and sticking to their own white community in some way. Now, people like Richard Spencer would use that to say, that's great, that's what should be happening. These aren't really communities that should be mixing. Let's keep them separate. That's not the direction I'm going. The direction I'm going, Pat, is in saying the white people that are part of whatever sort of lines have been drawn in terms of mixing and assimilation and whatever, the white people are also participants in that.
Yeah, and it partly has to do with where you live. Like if you live in rural Nebraska and you're white, you just may not know a black person. You may not know a Hispanic person. and that's perfectly reasonable. But if you live in a city like here in Boston that's so diverse, that's majority minority, you really don't have that much of an excuse for not having a minority friend.
Yes, although Boston is very, very segregated, and very often, even though at the city level you have on paper diversity, at the neighborhood level, the diversity in Boston is significantly lower. And I did a very interesting interview. I forget the author's name. It was a year or two ago, specifically about the segregation and racism of Northeast cities that consider themselves diverse and liberal, but at the sort of neighborhood level are extraordinarily segregated. But that's sort of another story. And Tom Brokaw here has apologized. There's every indication that the apology came not because he actually thinks what he said is wrong. He's not exactly a young guy, and these are beliefs that he's held for a very long time, and it's hard to imagine that saying the wrong thing once actually changed his mind. I think it's pretty clear he apologized because of the blowback, but we got an apology, and it doesn't seem as though he is going to have a big absence from media as a result of this. Maybe a little bit, but not particularly long. Send me your thoughts about what Tom Brokaw said. Send me your thoughts about this issue more broadly, and we will have a new show and a new bonus show for you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.